feel I'm actually myself is how I with my fitness or with my muscles or what else in myself.
Welcome back to Deprogram. This is video number 92. Why are we doing this video on Steve Bartlett being a Satanist? Well, it fits in with what I mentioned a couple of videos ago about my perceiving that some men in podcast media would be quite against what I've been trying to do. And all I've really been trying to do is bring them together so that they can lead by example and bring the people together. So if I sense that there are people in the podcast media area that would be going against what I'm trying to do, they're kind of going against themselves. And so naturally I'm going to talk about it. And I got the most difficult one out of the way first. That was David Icke. When I say difficult, because I regret the thought that he might not be on board with what I've been trying to do. I mean, for somebody who talks about freedom so much, you would think he would see the potential in what I'm putting forward here. So that one's done. And now, I've played this clip a number of times.
I was thinking once, who's more powerful than kings and potentates, prime ministers and dictators? You've got it, the fourth estate.
And now I'll let Chris Hedges introduce another author to explain why I keep repeating that same clip.
Is Les Leopold, co-founded the Labor Institute and is the author of Wall Street's War on Workers.
We need some sort of an uprising, that is structured, not another, Tahrir Square, Arab Spring, we are the 99%. We need it structured. You need an organization that actually has the infrastructure to hold us together.
I think it goes without saying that podcast media in 2024 is the only organization that has the infrastructure to hold the masses together in a time when we need to band together like this. I mean, I don't really think I should have to sell this idea. I think it should be obvious to everyone that this is what the people need to take our power back. But if both of those authors haven't got you convinced yet, then maybe Dr. Asim Malhotra will convince you.
These corporations. So the way through, like any revolution or any sort of exposing the injustice, Kim, is actually through channels like this, through alternative independent media, through ripple effect through the masses. We collectively as citizens are the people that are going to win this battle, but we have to all come together and we all have to start speaking out.
So you see, what I'm asking for is something that every thinking person would be asking for. They really sit down and think about how we're going to deal with rogue politicians. It all comes down to those who have the means to influence the masses. There is nobody else. And to think that it used to be other media like news media or the press, newspapers in the days when, people used to run around delivering newspapers. It's not about the platform. It doesn't matter if it's TV news, print news, podcast media, or any other media. What matters is it's who has the potential or who has the means to reach the masses. It wouldn't matter if it was, Hollywood or, pop music culture or any field in civilized society that has the means to really reach a lot of people. That's who the responsibility falls to in times like this. Not because I want it that way. That's just the way it is. I'm just talking about what is. And I think that's obvious. I think everybody, can see that. I think perhaps one of the reasons why the podcasters that I share this idea with that don't communicate with me is because if if they were in a situation where they had to put this idea in front of their audiences, they would possibly have their whole audiences writing their case sort of the way I do. Like with me, it's just one person sending out a few emails. But if anybody, let this idea get out to their audience, they would have potentially thousands of people saying, why aren't you guys doing this? So that's just an afterthought. But the fact that it's so logical and so necessary makes me really, I'm kind of on alert when I listen to anybody in the media, when I watch a podcast or listen to anyone. I'm always, as I said previously, I'm always listening to see, is this somebody who would work together, who would unite the people, who would challenge, the rogue state? And, there are a lot of people who I think would be on our side, and they're not really getting mentioned. It's those who I feel are potentially working against what mankind really needs right now that I'm talking about. And as you saw on the thumbnail, I accused Steve Bartlett of being a Satanist. And how do I know that? Well, once again, I'm accusing somebody of something that I myself have been guilty of. And when it was brought to my attention that I had been living as a Satanist, that really hit me hard. It was a former Satanist who said it. And he explained it like this. If you wake up in the morning and all you think about all day is me and my family, or me and my friends, and then you go to sleep at night thinking about yourself, and then you wake up the next day and it's just me again, and that's your whole life, just thinking about yourself, that's what Satanism is. And, I thought, well, Satanism, don't they, do sacrifice rituals and worship Satan and everything? And apparently that's not what Satanism is about. Satanism is more about egotism, about seeing oneself as God, and not in the spiritual way that we all have the essence of God within us, but in an egotistical way. And so to confirm that for you, I'll insert a clip here from Marilyn Manson.
Well, I'm very much into philosophy, a lot of different philosophers that I've read over the years, like Nietzsche, Darwin, Freud, Aleister Crowley, and finally Anton LaVey. And fortunately, he's still alive, so I got to meet with him and talk about his ideas and things like that. And in America, Satanism is sensationalized and kind of misunderstood, and people associate it with worshiping the devil and things like that. But it's really a philosophy about individuality and self-preservation. It's about being your own God. And
before I go any further with this, I think it's important that I point out there's two different types of people. You've got the people who actually can afford to consider others, and then you've got the people who are just surviving from one day to the next. People who are living from week to week, who literally can't afford to actually live well. We can't expect those people to be contributing anything to the larger society. They're just trying to survive. And unfortunately, most people are in that situation. And that's why I feel very strongly that it's up to the people who do have the means to contribute something, that they must do it. It's important that the people who can contribute do contribute. So how do you decide where that line is? For me personally, I think if you've got enough savings that you could not work for a few months, then you're obligated to contribute some of your time towards helping others in some way. And that could be within your community, or it could be through social media, trying to do it on a wider scale. However you do it. But this is a part of being human. It's a part of everybody's spiritual evolution. A lot of people don't realize that yet, but that's what we're here to do. You'll notice that when you do something that helps other people, it's very rewarding. It's a part of how we're programmed. If you're not programmed that way, I think it's a bit of a worry. You want to have a look into what's going on with you, because most people will tell you that when they help others, that's the most rewarding feeling we can get. And I want to let that become a part of our lives, because that's what brings happiness into our lives. And I understand that most people don't have the luxury or the means of being able to do that. So I'm not talking about them. In this video, I'm specifically talking about Steve Bartlett. I mean, I have never looked up how much money anybody has. It's not something that interests me. I am not a nosy person like that. It's not the type of Google searches that I do. But judging by what he says from his own mouth on the videos that I've watched while researching him, he owns many companies and businesses, and he sounds like he's very well off. And more power to him. I always look to successful people to see what I can learn from them. I would never hold that against anybody, but I hold it against somebody when they've had a reasonable level of success and they are still living like a Satanist, just me, all day and all night. And look at these clips that I'm going to share with you in this video. What I perceive is other podcasters who I have gotten through to, not that they give me any sense of satisfaction, but just from my own perception that I feel I have probably gotten through to, they may have approached him and he'd be like a cowardly little worm, he just worm his way out of it with these silly excuses I'm going to share with you. And I think this is really wrong, because anybody that has such a huge following in the millions of subscribers, I think it's important that they remember where they came from, who made them. People in the media, they are only as strong as their base. Their base is what made them. So if you've got a huge base, then you've got to give something back. You can't just be advertising and selling stuff and trying to extract from your audience and not give back. I mean, giving back by way of just producing content that gets clicks but actually doesn't serve in a more meaningful way, that's just self-serving. And I don't think we can afford to live in a world like that for much longer. We need to move into a world where we cooperate with each other and we do things just to be of service, because that's the most rewarding thing we can do. That's where we get our spiritual growth from. That's what takes us from being useless, fearful nobodies to becoming spiritually evolved beings. And so when you've got someone who is as ambitious as this.
Question. If you could sit at a table with any 4 guests from the Diary of a CEO, who would you choose? Here's a challenge for the entire Diary of a CEO community. If we hit 10 million subscribers by the end of 2024, you will get to pick 4 guests for your dream conversation, and you can make it weird or you can make it wonderful. And here is the best part. 3,000 of you that subscribe will be invited to join this conversation live, in person, and for free. Subscribe now, and let's make this happen together.
Expecting his base to take him from 7.8 million to 10 million in just a few months. And with the way the Google algorithm is working, they just hammer this guy. Like, anytime I've got autoplay on, they'll hit me with a Steve Bartlett video, because they want people like this, people who have no interest in challenging the state, That's exactly who Google and YouTube want to lift up. And the people who I perceive as being the lifeline that we all need, they're going to be put down. And I don't want to see that. I don't want to see selfish, greedy, inconsiderate, de facto Satanists rise while selfless, caring people who actually want to better our society stay down. That's unacceptable. So we'll go through some of these clips that have informed me that Stephen Bartlett is not on our side. First up, he's interviewing Boris Johnson, of all people, and they're talking about Brexit. It seems that Bartlett wanted the UK to stay under the thumb of the European Union.
You know, you talk about the pandemic being the most difficult thing. It was very, very difficult. And it was very difficult to persuade the British public to, very difficult to find ways of stopping the spread of the disease. But one thing we did better than any other European country was vaccinate. And one reason we were able to vaccinate so fast is because we had regulatory freedom of exactly the kind. I mean, there's a complete fluke, but it turned
we'll talk about
exactly
that.
the kind.
We'll talk about that.
That I had advocated.
We'll talk about that.
And so that for me was absolutely crucial. And then there are
we'll talk about that. I just want to
examples.
I need to make sure I'm clear, because if I'm not clear moving forward, then my audience aren't going to be clear. This idea of like freedom. If we take the analogy of like a parachute, if I cut the cords, I'm free, but I'm also in danger unless I have a paraglider waiting to catch me.
These are the words of a true coward.
But I'm also in danger unless I have a paraglider waiting to catch me. And my point here is, I understand all the big emotional words, that freedom and take back control, etc. It sounds compelling to me.
Really?
It sounds compelling to me.
That's a blatant lie.
But as I said with the football analogy, what's the plan thereafter? And I think I actually don't want the quote unquote
cutting. You talk about the parachute, right? And cutting the cords of the parachute. Actually, it was the other way around. It was because we'd come out of the EU that we were able to equip ourselves with a parachute faster than anybody else, and we were able to get out of the burning plane faster and to get to ground safely faster because we'd taken back control of our regulatory freedom. And that meant that by March 2021, we'd vaccinated 45% of the adult population, and of the older people, I think we'd done almost 180 over 80. We'd done almost 100%.
Matt Hancock said that we could have saved 30,000 lives if we'd locked down earlier.
If you've ever needed evidence to prove that you do not need to be an intelligent person to make money, that'll prove it to you. I mean, imagine that. Cutting the cords on a parachute, that's freedom. I mean, what kind of mentality would even allow himself to verbalize such rubbish, such absolute stupidity? I don't want to be abusive. I'm just pointing out that this is somebody who is just harvesting his audience, and now when he has an opportunity to really be of service, instead of actually being of service, he's actually fighting against the principles of freedom. That whole Boris Johnson interview was like making Boris Johnson look like some kind of a hero. After the millions of people who were killed by those shots. I mean, it's so sickening that I can't even, it was bad enough for me to have to watch it just to get a couple of clips for you. For me to go through all the sickening things in that podcast, I would have never got this video done. It's actually taken me longer to do this than I would have liked because there's more in there that I want to talk about, but I'm just going to focus on a couple of the main things which I put a bit of thought into why it was so important that the UK was the first European country, or the first country in the world, to be so heavily vaccinated. Who lives in the UK? You've got both the Rothschild cartel and the Windsors, the royal family. You know, if there's ever been a geographical location that needs an uprising of the people, that's where it needs to happen. If there's a police force anywhere on the globe that needs to understand moral principles and find their conscience, it's the police of the UK, specifically those in the City of London, and those who, anybody who can see what the Rothschild family's been getting up to, because protecting that family is setting up the rest of the world for a very dark future. And this is a bit off the topic of Stephen Bartlett, but I have wanted to bring your attention to something about Rothschild. I've said this before, but I can't emphasize it enough. When I was watching those ICJ hearings, and it was clearly stated that a plausible case had been made that Israeli officials were engaged in a genocide, I was watching that thinking to myself, Jacob Rothschild would be absolutely shitting in his pants. I mean, he knows that all that blood is on his hands, and his entire life he's managed to own every court system so that nothing like that could ever be said publicly. And all of a sudden, that was said over mainstream, all over the internet, that Israeli officials who work for him, he owns the courts, he owns the infrastructure, he pays the judges, he built the whole thing. This is the Rothschilds' state. Israel is a Rothschild state. They built it. And to hear those words said, that the officials that are working for him are engaged in a genocide, I was visualizing in my mind the panic that he would be experiencing. And the next thing I know, within a day, I hear that he's dead on what was clearly the worst day of his life. There has never been a day in the history of his life, 80-something years, there's never been a day when such a terrifying thing would have been publicized, especially by a court. And within a day of that being said over the internet, he's dead. I mean, come on, on the worst day of his life, unless it was spoken about openly that he keeled over and died when he was watching the ICJ hearings. I mean, if they said that, I might buy it. I might have thought, well, I believe that. But to just say that he just died of natural causes on that day, I mean, come on.
While we're on the topic of Rothschild and Israel, where do people think that the Israel lobby gets so much money from? It would appear to me that Rothschild and the printing press of the Federal Reserve would be the backbone of the Israel lobby and AIPAC, and nobody talks about that. Where do they get their money from? It's a Rothschild operation.
Anyway, so I don't want to harp on about that too much, but you see what I mean, why they need the people of Britain to be really sick and weak and confused and damaged by this poison. It was a priority for the Sabbatean death cult, which is Rothschild. And, that's them, so. But just back to this, Bartlett character, to be spending like 2 hours puffing up Boris Johnson, who is among the most evil people. I mean, why would you do that when you're not on mainstream TV? You don't need a paycheck from the, news corporations. You're an independent individual. Why would you want to peddle propaganda like that? I mean, it's not like he's short of money and he has to do it to survive. You know, this is, when you look at these things, you know, you have to be able to see how evil it is to participate in such dishonesty. And then to consider that no doubt he would have been approached by people who are saying, you know, we need to come together. We need to give the people somewhere to turn to help our civilization get out of this mess that we're in. And instead of actually saying, yeah, that's the right thing to do, and joining forces and doing it, have a listen to what Bartlett's response would have been.
I was going to do a post last night. I was thinking, like, so many people spend their lives. I was scrolling through Instagram, and I wrote the post and I just didn't post it. But so I noticed that so many people go through their lives like looking for an enemy, like looking for the person or the system or the government or the political party that's currently wronging them. And they commit their whole life to just this focus of who's wronging me. And I need to point them out and call them out and scream at them. And I've never fallen into that trap, but, I do have a competition with myself. Mm-hmm. And I feel like that's very healthy, because what I'm actually looking for in myself is some form of progress, whether it's how I show up or with my fitness or with my muscles or whatever. This constant, search for progress in myself. And there, when I do discover progress, I can celebrate it and I can have that gratitude we talked about. And so anyone's progress, whether it's when I went from being a university dropout to getting my first investor, that is like, oh my God. And it's only in hindsight and with some aging wisdom that I start to realize that those moments were so unbelievably important. They're so motivational, identifying your progress. And
first of all, you don't have to look for an enemy. The enemy is looking at you. How much taxes do you pay? Now, in Bartlett's case, no doubt he can afford to pay his taxes. But I live near people who can't afford to pay their taxes. They're in their 70s and they're working all day and they have no money because they're paying their taxes. So you don't have to go looking for an enemy when you've got a state who is violently extorting and extracting the resources from an impoverished community. That's nobody has to go looking for that. The enemy is haunting all of us. And what a cowardly thing to say. Bartlett might actually think that he's a free man because he can afford to pay his taxes. But it doesn't matter what percentage of your money is being stolen. When you have to work and you can't keep what you work for, you're a slave. And I don't know about you, but I'm not willing to just hand over more and more hours as a slave to not my community. It's not like taxes are funding the things that are needed in my community. They're funding known organized crime cartels and pedophiles.
And there you have it. Here's the thing. I say all across the West, the social contract has been utterly destroyed by the powerful. Still, taxes, increasingly ruinous taxes, are hoovered up from people. It's my opinion that taxes now are no more and no less than the collection of money with menaces, the forced funding of organised crime. Anyone who thinks their road tax goes to maintain the roads or that their income tax goes to build hospitals is dreaming. I say your taxes are collected now for one reason and one reason only, so that you don't have that money. It's about immiseration and nothing more. It comes down to warmongers and money, and in pursuit of every last cent, every last penny, the ultimate enemy is us. Just because I'm paranoid doesn't mean they're not out to get you.
All these politicians are engaged in organised crime and pedophilia. That's who we are funding with the life force energy that we put into taxes. So nobody has to go looking for that. That's the enemy haunting us, chasing us. And then this thing about the trap.
And I've never fallen into that trap.
I've figured out that that's just his little little escape route, you know. Oh, that's a trap, you know. You're in the trap, and you're locking your own supporters in the trap with you. You have the means to help others get out of the trap, and your cowardice, your spineless character is actually locking the people who made you who you are down into the trap of oppression and poverty. In other words, Bartlett is making the trap. He's holding the trap together by refusing to do what is needed of people who can reach the masses. And I just think that's one of the most selfish and disgusting things that I've heard anybody say in such a long time. You know, I've not taken any pleasure in making this video. It's quite sickening for me to look at somebody not only lying to the people who made him who he is, but he's lying to himself. He's actually peddling that rubbish to try to lift himself out of the low-life, cowardly position that he knows he belongs in. And that's unacceptable. It needs to be said to him. He's being a worm. He's being a measly little cockroach who needs to actually get up and be a man and do what needs to be done. Don't be a coward. Serve. You know, don't just take. Give. That's what it means to be human. You can see that this is just what he does. It's like, it's his excuse, this trap thing. Look.
And we fall into the trap of thinking that the great thing about doing this job is I have to teach myself to always look at the other side. So if you represent one side, my job in many respects is to try and understand the other side so we can talk about the other side as well, to like represent the other side. And that's been really useful for me because it's stopped me falling into the trap of like conforming with a tribe.
You know, now it's a trap to just take a position. I mean, so in other words, he's too weak-spirited to take a position. He prefers to just always sit on the fence. So he never has to actually commit to a position. He'd rather just sit on the fence. And that's because he's so clever that he's not falling into a trap. That's just bullshit, you know? Like, take a position. Learn the difference between right and wrong and choose right and stand against wrong. What's this bullshit about sitting on the fence and then telling people that that's because you're not falling into a trap? It's just lying to yourself. At a time when we need men to be men, to stand up and be honest. So that's really all I wanted to say about this. There's a lot of things that I find really very selfish and sickening about the work that he's been doing. I mean, you know, that clip that started with that bodybuilder.
And I feel me with myself.
I was into Muay Thai and kickboxing and bodybuilding, and it's a fun way to spend your time, and it's enjoyable to focus on your physical health. But in a time when we're all living as slaves and we're watching everybody around us being impoverished, you know, it's when you need to sort of not just think about yourself and your muscles and your body and your diet. And I mean, you know, there's a time when you actually need to think about others. And, you know, I make a considerable sacrifice, and I'm not a wealthy person who's in a position who can afford to sacrifice anywhere near as much as many of the people in media. So, and this is why I take it upon myself to talk about this, because if I'm one of these people who I can afford some months of not working, but I couldn't do it for years, you know, and I'm still willing to contribute something to the service of others, then those who have really considerable wealth need to pull their finger out and learn what it means to be human and be a part of it. And so I hope this video really makes this guy have a look in the mirror at what sort of a man he is, and stop being that and grow up and be a real man and help us out of this mess that we're in. so that it doesn't keep getting so much worse at the rate that it is. Because if you allow that to happen, you're not going to want to be in this world. It's not about looking for an enemy. It's about the world is being destroyed by an enemy, and we need to come together to stop it from happening and to take our rights back. This is all about just being able to have human rights, which most people don't even understand, which is what it all comes down to, because that's the whole point of what I'm doing here is to help people understand their rights, which is basically the difference between right and wrong. All behaviors are your rights except for murder, rape, assault, trespass, coercion, theft, and deception. They're the only wrongdoings. Everything else is your right to do. You have the right to do everything except for those 7 sins. And this really needs to be the guiding philosophy for mankind going forward. And if it's not, we're in big trouble. We have to get this out to the masses. And I am 100% positive that when you put this into the minds of enough people, the powerful will no longer be the powerful. People will just take what's rightfully theirs, and when these parasites try to hand down orders to extract it from them, they'll just be ignored. People tolerate politicians because they don't actually know what is rightfully theirs. But if you tell the people what their rights are, and these cockroaches, in politics try to steal those rights, they'll just be ignored. And that's what needs to happen. So I'm doing my best here, trying to help us move forward in that way. And I work pretty hard to get this idea across to other people in the media. And I do get the sense that they're hearing me. A lot of time is passing and not much is happening, but I do feel this sense intuitively that things are happening that we're not being told about, good things. I'm waiting for this day when we're all just hit with the big news that it's happened and they're all getting rounded up. That's my fantasy. I literally think about that all the time, every day, like probably most of the day that I don't have to think about what else I'm doing something else. If ever I can be daydreaming, I'm daydreaming about that. I would ask you to join me, because the more people that think about that future, the more hope we have of manifesting it and talk about it. This is what we need to see happen. So that's what I'm trying to do here. I don't like to make videos just to be negative about people. There's a purpose to this, and I'm sure you all understand that. So thank you for sticking with me, and I'll look forward to being with you in the next video. God bless everyone. See you then.